starting to record. We'll give it like 10 seconds.
यार मेरा लाइटिंग कुछ ज्यादा ही अच्छा लग रहा है यार.
तुम्हारा लाइटिंग अच्छा नहीं है, मेरा बुरा है. It is bad lighting on my part. It just contrast me looks much nicer, which is good.
हाँ,
You're the guest. You should look nicer rather than me. All right, so
ठीक है.
let's start with this. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mind Your Buffalo podcast. This is your host Ravikant, aka the Buffalo Intellectual. You guys have been hearing me rant week after week, so I thought it's nice that we get some sensible voices on the show and you listen to some voice of reason for a change. And some very interesting developments happening in the world of law, and a topic which is always very close to my heart, which is about caste inequality and discrimination in institutions of higher education. And so in that context, I thought probably the best person to kind of speak to would be like my good friend, Advocate Disha Wadekar. Thank you, Disha, for coming on the show. Before we get you in, I want to kind of introduce you properly. Um, Disha is it has been is one of those very cool people who like try to stay in the background. Like she's been part of a lot of very important legal interventions. She's a very powerful voice in the Supreme Court, committed Ambedkarite for life. She's been the reason why we've had some very interesting interventions in the EWS reservation case. Recently, she's also been instrumental in filing, about like the idea of Buddhist sites being, taken over by temples. There's also like her work recently with, Sukanya Shanta on prison manuals and the casteism within that framework. These are all cases which have made the newspaper headlines. She's also part of very like high profile atrocity cases, Delta Meghwal case, for instance. For the audience who don't know about these cases, please go back and read some of this. Maybe I'll put some of the links in. Each of them, like we can talk to Disha and it'll be like a very, very interesting conversation because there's so much to explore on all of that. Uh, More recently, she's also filed a not more recently, we're like she filed a intervention on behalf of the mothers of brother Rohith Vemula and Dr. Payal Tadvi, two of our great stars who were lost to institutional caste discrimination. And it has now resulted the Supreme Court in stepping in and asking UGC to give data on caste discrimination, equal opportunity cells. So we thought we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's a lot about Disha. She's recently done her LLM from Columbia University. She's a teacher. She's taught in I think Jindal Law School among other places. She's a well-known public speaker. She runs one of the co-founders of SEED, which is an intervention which opens a door for law practice for marginalized caste students, which is a very important intervention. Law is one of the most gate-kept spaces in India, and she's made some real difference in that space. She's also a regular writer and activist. I had the good fortune of writing one piece we did together for the Caravan on the OBC reservation issues. She writes regularly on platforms from from research journals to things. So yeah, I can go on and on and on. She's also a Broadway music enthusiast and and probably my biggest enemy when it comes to opinions on Pune city, because I can't tolerate it and she loves it, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I wanted to kind of set Disha up. She's been doing some great work, and thank you for taking time out, Disha. I know you're very busy always. You in the middle of a lot of important things, so thank you for coming on this dumb little show and like giving us your time.
Thanks for having me, Ravikant. I think I've been your fan. I mean, we're friends and we've collaborated, and but I'm a fan of your podcast, and I'm a fan of your work, and it's so great to be on this podcast. And I hope to connect with a lot of young intellectuals and
You've
academics.
never heard my podcast.
I
Let's
know.
be real. You don't hear my podcast. You've never
Maybe
probably
like when you didn't shift to the video mode, I think
right,
I used to listen to your podcasts.
right.
Yeah, during
It's
COVID.
still available on Spotify, Disha.
I,
Like, look, it's
okay, give
fine.
me my
Huh.
subscription then.
No. That's a different show. It's fine. Look, advocates in Supreme Court doing all of these great things that I just described should not be listening to my podcast. Okay, it'll be a worrying day for democracy and the judicial system. But thank you for saying that. Like, I know you do follow my work, and like I'm always very humbled by it, and you always want to engage on a lot of these things, and that's how actually this episode was kind of conceptualized, because we were talking about this judgment. So like um, I want to kind of center for the audience because they may not be very clued into what this is. So do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about the history of like what this petition was, where does it come from, and what form it has taken?
Yeah, so just to start with, this is not a judgment, this is an order. So it's an interim order of the Supreme Court. And there's more to come because right now we've just started and the Supreme Court has just asked for more data from UGC. And things have already started shifting, like we can see, and people are talking about this petition. But to start with, I had filed this petition in 2019, and that's the sorry state of affairs as far as this case is concerned, and most other cases are concerned. In 2019, as we know, in May 2019, Payal Tadvi committed suicide. It was an institutional murder. And I was representing the family or the victim side in the Payal Tadvi case, which was a criminal matter, which was a suicide case. And around that time, I was doing a lot of lectures and panel discussions after, because there was this whole Justice for Payal movement, right? And we've seen that in Rohith's case as well. And then coming to Payal Tadvi, there was a huge uproar. And Payal Tadvi was the first woman, or rather the first person from the Tadvi community. Tadvi is a tribal community, scheduled tribe community, to become a doctor, right? And she was doing her master's, her MS at TN Tupiwala College in Mumbai. And she was consistently being harassed by her peers. But most importantly, and this is the story that I found out through Payal Tadvi's mother, Abida Tadvi. And this was during a sort of this panel discussion that she opened up and she said that, look, it's not like nothing could have been done to save Payal, right? Because it's not that Payal took this decision in a split second. This was happening for almost a year. She was being harassed by her seniors. And we had taken these cases and we had taken the complaint to the dean of the college, the head of the institution. It was Payal's mother who had approached the head of the institution. It was Payal's husband who had approached the head of the institution, right? Even the dean and everyone who was supposed to take some action around this. But in fact, her mother said that we did not have any mechanism where we could voice our concerns and Payal's concerns about the discrimination that she was facing from her seniors, right? And in fact, Payal's mother said that when she took the complaint letter to the head of the institution, it was not accepted by the head of the institution, and they were asked to leave. So the letter was not even accepted, and that got me thinking that this is absurd, right? Here is a student who is constantly being harassed. She's in a pathetic mental state. This is a 25, 26-year-old woman, married woman, right? And she's constantly reaching out to her parents. She's reaching out to her husband. She's reaching out to people who will understand, and they are trying to reach out to the institution and the heads of the institution, and they are trying to find a solution to what is happening with her. and there is no redressal. There is no redressal. There is, forget redressal, there is no recognition of what is happening with her. And that's when I asked Abida ji if there was any grievance mechanism at this, grievance redressal mechanism at this institution, and did they approach that particular sort of committee or internal mechanism. And Payal's mother said that we're not aware of any of this. And initially, when I started, I then looked up into Rohit's case, and I was like, there should have been some redressal mechanism for Rohit. We know none of these work. We know how internal complaints committees work, right? But they are there. There is some deterrence value, right? Even if we see internal complaints committees in, say, sexual harassment cases, we know that they are there in every institution. At least today, there will not be a single institution that is reputed that would not have an internal committee. And I thought that, if caste discrimination is so rampant and it is happening to Payal and it is happening to Rohit and it has happened to multiple students, it has happened to Anita, it has happened to Fatima, it has happened to so many other people, we should have a mechanism. And initially, I started out with this idea that we had the Vishakha guidelines for sexual harassment at workplace, right? And the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act just sort of didn't come at this juncture, in 2015 or 2013 rather. There was a whole litigation that happened, which was the Vishakha guidelines. Those guidelines were brought by the Supreme Court, right? And finally, that resulted in the formation of, in the creation of this particular act. And then I also remembered that, well, during Rohit's, when Rohit's suicide happened, there was a demand for a Rohit Act, right? And I think we all need to remember that because Rohit's Shahadat, I think ninth Shahadat day is approaching, and we will observe that Shahadat day. But there was in 2016 a demand, a popular demand from students from all sorts of political parties that there should be a Rohit Act to prevent caste discrimination in higher educational institutions, right? And we sort of seem to, we've forgotten that. And I thought that, if we cannot approach the legislature, I'm a lawyer, I can approach the court. And I asked Payal's mother if this is something that she would be interested in. And she was very much interested in it. She kept saying that, if that complaint letter had been accepted, and they could have done anything, they could have just warned the girls, the seniors who were harassing Payal, Payal would have been there amongst us. And that sort of really, that was my motivation, and that was the reason I decided to file this petition. And I spoke to Rohit's mother, and she seemed to have similar concerns. So you have to understand that both these mothers are doing this in the larger community interest, right? Because they are fighting their own individual battles and their own individual criminal cases in the trial courts, in the high courts, in the Supreme Court. And it is a lot. And despite that, these mothers chose to intervene in an issue that is writ large, that really doesn't impact them directly, right? What has happened in their lives, and they're trying to overcome that. But even then, I think there is this sort of desire and this need to change things for the generations and the next sort of youngsters and students and academics and doctors and engineers from the community who are going to come to sort of protect them and to prevent the discrimination that has been so rampant in higher educational institutions.
No, I think that's for a lot of the audience, people who kind of listen to the show, I don't think they truly understand just how nasty a university framework can be. Because ek to India already there is such a massive anti-reservation propaganda which every generation of teenagers face. You're in school, तो आप अगर आप upper caste हो सवर्णा हो तो आपको anyways they tell you that reservation is bad. So once you enter the university as a first generation learner, as an SC ST OBC person, I think there are just so many ways in which you're made to feel outside the system and the violence of it. I don't think that truly it is well understood, even by well-meaning Savarna sociologists, anthropologists. I don't think these things are done because student suicides have been a lingering thing. My own, very publicly, I've written about it. My own experience within these institutions, spaces is very, very, very triggering. Ab I don't take shit, but like for most of my academic career, I've experienced some version of this. So in that sense, your intervention is very like this intervention is very timely. The fact that you were able to get, the mothers of Dr. Payal Tadvi and Brother Rohith Vemula, like the symbolism of that
Yeah.
is itself so powerful. In a year where we've had again 24 suicides in the top IITs and IIMs again. So, what I wanted to kind of ask as a follow up, like that's how you got into the case and you realize that there's not even like a very basic guideline. Like if there's a sexual harassment complaint, at least there is an ICC. So at
Correct.
least a person can go and say, "Okay, ICC mein report dalni hai." Now the case is ICC is not functioning, but
Yes.
in caste there is
That's
like
the implementation issue. That's
right,
different.
that's an implementation issue, but in caste you found that there's no such thing as such. So I wanted to kind of ask you now the Supreme Court has kind of asked passed an interim order saying ki like tell us what is the status of equal opportunity cells. So tell us a
Hmm.
little bit more about what's an equal opportunity cell.
Yeah.
How is it different from like a caste discrimination or a cell or something of that nature? And what's the status of it? India now has public-private universities. Maybe we'll come to this later, but just in general, what's an equal opportunity cell? What is the data that Supreme Court's kind of asking? Why is UGC now scrambling because of this?
Yeah. So, Ravikant, I think I should mention this that I went through 4 years of engineering school and 3 years of law school, and I was not aware of equal opportunity cells. In fact, let me also tell you that even when I took up Payal Tadvi's case, I was not aware that there was an equal opportunity cell. In 2016, when Rohit died, people were not aware that we are supposed to have equal opportunity cells, right? So that is the kind of ignorance, erasure, invisibilization of this aspect. And I'll come to equal opportunity cells. So when I filed the petition and I started doing my research, and I had to, because if I'm asking for some guidelines, like random guidelines out of nowhere, to the Supreme Court as far as caste discrimination in higher education is concerned, I will have to do my homework and see that have there been any regulations or guidelines that have existed or that have been passed, right? And I did my research and I found out that there were two very important regulations. One is the SC ST 1998 regulations. So these regulations came in 1998. And what these regulations talk about is a SC ST cell under a liaison officer, right? And the role of the SCST cell is very different from an equal opportunity cell. I'll tell you what the SCST cell does. So the SCST cell is mainly in government institutions, government colleges and universities, where you have to implement government policies, including the reservation policy, right? So you have a liaison officer who implements the reservation policy, takes care of the roster, all of that. So anything related to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the liaisoning officer is basically liaisoning between the government policies on SCSTs and the higher educational institution. So that is their job, right? And that's it. The SCST cell is not a grievance redressal mechanism. These regulations, by the way, came in 1998, and these are not guidelines. So we need to understand that this is not for the institutions to say that, oh, if we want, we will do it. It's just merely a UGC guideline. These are not
So
guidelines.
just
These are
just
mandates.
just to kind of interrupt for the audience,
Yeah.
what I think Disha is talking about is that universities are required to have an SC ST cell. That SC ST cell, many of us actually mistake as a grievance. Like कोई problem है, तो आप SC ST cell के पास जाओ. In fact, I work as in the university system now for 9-10 years. I'm in a I'm in a management sort of position also. Like I'm in a dean level, assistant associate dean level position.
Hmm.
Even within our systems, it is considered, oh, SCST cell ke paas jao. But you are saying SCST cell has always been just, this is a government of India policy, this is a thing. आपको इतने लोगों को यहाँ पर इस पोजीशन में डालना है, या ये आपके लिए कोई स्कीम बनाई गई है. So it's just a liaisoning offer. It's not a redressal mechanism like ICC, Internal Complaints Committees, for sexual harassment cases.
Correct. Correct. So your discrimination cases or complaints do not go to an SC cell. It is an implementing authority, right? So this is about the 1998 regulations. These are UGC regulations. And by the way, like I was saying, that they are not guidelines, they are mandatory. So it is mandatory for every college and institution. And we will go into the definition of how UGC defines higher educational institutions and whether these regulations apply to private colleges and universities a little later. But let's say for now, we're talking about government institutions. They are all supposed to have an SC cell. And this is the first thing that all students, and especially Bahujan students, should do, is that they should find out if their college or institution has an SC cell. Like that is the first thing. The second thing is the 2012 equity regulations. So it's called the UGC Promotion of Equity in Higher Education Institutions regulations of 2012. So these regulations talk about the equal opportunity cell. So this is the cell that the Supreme Court has talked about. The Supreme Court is asking UGC for this data on these equal opportunity cells. And these are the grievance redressal mechanisms. So these are the cells where you can take complaints of caste discrimination before the equal opportunity cell. And the equal opportunity cell is composed such that it is under an anti-discrimination officer. So this is a single member body. I'll also talk about the problems with this because it's a single member body. And the anti-discrimination officer or the ADO is supposed to be someone who is a professor or an assistant professor, right? And every college and every university, including private colleges, private universities, in fact, even deemed universities, are mandated to have these equal opportunity cells. It's mandatory. If you look at the regulations, the 2012 equity regulations, they define higher educational institutions. And higher educational institutions are defined as institutions under Section 2 and Section 3 of the UGC Act, right? And the UGC Section 2 and Section 3 of the UGC Act basically talks about all kinds of universities, aided, unaided, government, private, affiliated colleges as well. And Section 3 talks about deemed universities, right? And it also talks about all kinds of colleges and all kinds of universities that have been brought up, that have been brought about by central acts or state acts, right? So this would, you think of all the institutions that you can think of that have come under these central and state acts, including private institutions, right? So all of them are mandated to have these equal opportunity cells under an anti-discrimination officer. There is a full process that has been, or procedure that has been earmarked as to how this complaint is to be dealt with. The ADO is supposed to take the complaint. There needs to be a web portal also. In fact, every college is supposed to have a dedicated portal for the equal opportunity cells. And one can even lodge a complaint directly online. If you don't want to approach someone, you should have the facility to lodge your complaint online, right? And then there is the equal opportunity officer is supposed to hold an inquiry. After the inquiry, he, she, they are supposed to come up with a report, inquiry report, and that report is then submitted before the head of the institution, right? And then there is punishments that have been also described under the equity regulations. And if someone is found to be guilty of discriminating on the basis of caste, then there is punishment also under these regulations. So these are stringent. There is punishment. There is full procedure of inquiry. There is an equal opportunity cell that is supposed to hold these inquiries, right? And you just see this like blatant and brazen sort of there is no compliance with the equity regulations at all. And almost you point at any university, say out of 10 universities, 9 universities do not have anything that even has a semblance of what the equity regulations require them to do. So I think, yeah, so this is about the 2012 regulations, and this is what the Supreme Court is really wanting to know, whether these universities have established these cells.
So basically, what you're like saying is that these regulations were mandated. It's supposed to be there. Of course, we know nobody's really worked on this at all, and everybody has just slept on it. Like political parties, university authorities, civil society, media. Nobody has really touched it. As a result, none of the universities seem to have this cell, right? So now the court is saying कि आप हमको बताओ कि आपने क्या किया है. I was reading recently कि UGC has filed an affidavit saying हमने चिट्ठी भेजी है. We sent a letter to universities कि शुरू करो या बताओ क्या है. So UGC is basically, it appears like washing its hands off, saying like, look, you said this needs to be done. We told universities to get it done, right?
Yeah.
So what is the afterlife of this? Because we know what we'll find. Either these universities will come out and misreport and backdated on paper show के हमारे पास तो ये cell है, which is the other open secret of Indian higher education. Everything is existing on paper, nothing actually exists in real life. Or they will just chuma come out and say we didn't do it.
Yeah.
So then, like I know it's still an active ongoing case, like, but like what is the afterlife of this? Like कोर्ट ने बोला कि बताओ, अब नहीं है तो फिर क्या होगा फिर?
Yeah, so this is not new, Ravikant, these UGC letters, let me tell you. In fact, since 2016, especially after Rohith Vemula, UGC has been consistently, before that they never sent these letters. But after 2016, they've been consistently, year after year, sending these letters to all universities, right? Deemed universities, private, all kinds, okay? Saying that, well, there's a problem with that letter also, and I'll talk about it. They are not specifically mentioning the 2012 equity regulations. That is not what they are doing. But they're saying that you may have a complaints mechanism. The word may is very important, right? They're saying you may have a complaints mechanism for lodging complaints on caste discrimination. Then they are saying you may have a cell, and they're asking for data. They're asking for data. So what the court has done, the UGC has been doing, right? The UGC is also asking for data from universities year after year that tell us how many complaints of caste discrimination have come to you, right? It's called the action taken report format, and they do it in that format, and it's the same sort of format year after year. And we file RTIs to see, let's see, what are the universities saying to these letters. And we had two RTIs, a 2018 RTI and 2019 RTI. And Ravikant, 800 in 2018, 800 universities were sent these letters. Half of them did not even respond to that letter. Okay, the rest of them, when they were asked, do you have this cell, they are saying that, some of them are saying that we have a UGC mandated cell, we have a cell according to the guidelines, we have an SC ST cell, some of them are saying we have an internal mechanism. So it's just very vague. The answers that are coming are very vague, and none of them, either it's intentional, that they don't, I don't think it's possible that they're not aware of UGC regulations, right? But a lot of these universities are coming up with these answers. When they're asked about how many complaints you've received and what have you done with these complaints, you know what some of the responses are? Some of them are saying that we called these students and we gave them warning. Some of them are saying we did counseling with the student. So someone is filing a complaint and usi ka to counseling kar rahe ho. ठीक है. So these are the kind of responses that you see, and despite that, year after year, UGC is just doing its whatever so-called job of just sending letters, not taking any action on these non-compliant universities. This is blatant contempt of the UGC regulations, mandatory regulations, right? So this is blatant contempt of the law. And universities are doing this year after year, and UGC is just sending out letters, not taking any action. So this is the state of affairs. Now we think that, now that the Supreme Court has stepped in And I will not talk about the Supreme Court or comment on it because this is an ongoing case and I'm representing the petitioners. But we hope that UGC would have some, better answers to these questions. But it's not that we don't have this data. We know that universities are blatantly not complying with these regulations, and they're doing it with full impunity.
Right. So feel
Sorry,
free
what
to
was your
not.
question? I'm sorry, did I answer your question though?
You kind of did. I was trying to figure out like what happens now if the UGC kind of what the UGC letter is. UGC is basically so to break it down. What we've discussed so far is you found that there is something called an SC ST cell, which is only a liaisoning thing, which is not a grievance redressal. The grievance redressal mechanism comes from something called an equal opportunity cell with like some kind of a mandate of officer, and there are all these, just like actually the ICC. And
ICC.
like उसमें पूरा है कि आपको पोस्टर बनाना है, who's the officer, so similar guidelines exist. Now comes, why don't we see it in
Hmm.
action? Because nobody has taken action on it. So UGC sends out these chittis. None of the universities you're saying actually respond. They're
Hmm.
doing जो भी उनके मन में आ रहा है. So I just wanted to ask you a follow-up question on that. Like again, like I know the matter is still in court, but I don't know if you can answer this or not. So just from a legal point of view, as somebody who's not part of that world, what happens if a university doesn't follow a mandate? Forget this one. कोई भी ऐसा मैंडेट हो, सपोज आईसीसी हो या कुछ हो, ठीक है,
हाँ,
आपका एक रेगुलेशन है, आपको बोला गया है, यू हैव टू डू इट, and you're
correct,
not doing it. UGC has sent you chitti. UGC is
correct.
also not taking action. So what action actually can be taken against, let's say, a UGC or a university? Technically speaking, for any case, I'm not talking about this particular, anything which is mandated.
Yeah, so there are two other regulations that are mandated. One is, like we said, the ICC, but the Sexual Harassment Act doesn't directly apply to universities. It applies to workplaces.
Workplaces.
What is functioning? We need to know, even when it comes to ICCs, under what regulations are ICCs being set up. That is the Saksham guidelines or Saksham regulations of 2015. These are for discrimination, sexual harassment and discrimination against women in higher education, right? So you have the Saksham regulations for women, 2015, under which you have ICCs. Then you have the anti-ragging regulations, right? And the anti-ragging regulations are again also UGC regulations. And even under anti-ragging regulations, you have an internal sort of mechanism, internal complaints mechanism, right? And then you have the third one, which is for caste discrimination, which is the equity regulation. Now, if you compare um, the equity regulations, right, to the Saksham regulations, which is on women, which is for women, and the anti-ragging regulations, which is against ragging, you see that there is, even in the framing of the regulations, there's a huge problem, right? There is, under Section 12 of the UGC Act, UGC has powers to take action against non-compliant universities. And they are varied, and they have been defined in the Saksham regulations. They have been defined in the anti-ragging regulation. For instance, if a university doesn't have an ICC mandated under the Saksham regulations, UGC can fine them. UGC can put out a blurb in, say, newspapers, like mainstream newspapers, name and shame the university, right? UGC, if they are giving grants, they can withdraw the grants from the universities. So UGC, it's not like UGC doesn't have powers. UGC has a lot of powers, right? And you see that sort of intention to implement the regulations that is there with the anti-ragging regulations. We've almost, from where we've come, look at the last 5 6 years, where ragging was and where we are now. I think the anti-ragging regulations have played a huge role. They have this very stringent mechanism of non-compliance, right? And the UGC is following that. So if that is there with the anti-ragging regulations, that will and that intention is there, then why that, or even with, I think, ICC, even if, whatever is the state of ICC and how it is being implemented, we still know that there is an ICC in every college, and there has to be, at least on paper, right? And you see that intention with ICCs as well, but you don't see that with caste discrimination and the equal opportunity cells. And that is a problem, I would say, also with the regulations and the framing of the regulations, because the equity regulations of 2012 are not at par with the other existing regulations, whether it's on gender or ragging, you know. So they do not have any mechanism for punishing or holding universities accountable, right? Which these other two have. So I think this is a major problem. But there is a solution. You know, UGC still under the UGC Act can take action, which it has been taking in other cases. So I think it is more to do with an intention and a will. And in fact, there was this very good article in EPW that I read, and that's where I also sort of learned. And it did like this comparative analysis between all the three regulations, and it said that it is almost casteist in a way to, you know, not implement these regulations or not have these accountability mechanisms embedded in these regulations. And you can see that operate even at a very systemic level, how casteism operates in terms of of the will just of the state, or yeah, just the state to implement caste related guidelines and regulations.
No, that's a fantastic point because anti-ragging is something you can visibly see. आप जब you enter university, especially admission season, when the new batches come in, almost all major university, many major university campuses, there are giant posters and there's all of these things, anti-ragging cell. So it's very heavily and visibly enforced. And like internal complaints committee, though, like, for instance, like some of the organization, like the previous one where I worked, they only when there was a NAC inspection, they put up all the compliant posters and then they removed it, like, the day
Do
after.
something. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But at least they did that. At least
yes,
they understand that there it has its own issues.
yes,
But caste, like, it's not there at all. As a sociologist, I think that the answer is like ragging affects across caste,
yeah,
because like Savarna students may also get ragged pretty badly.
correct.
But caste discrimination works the other way around. But you're saying it's also about how the regulation itself has been framed, but
Hmm.
the UGC also has power.
Great
Even
power.
though
Yeah,
the
they can do
even though
that.
the regulation is not as strongly written as the anti-ragging thing,
Yeah.
UGC can still kind of do a lot of things. In which case, again, I would ask, like, not related to your, like, for the record, not related to this current case. If, let's say, UGC has power over something,
Hmm.
right? And if they are systemically not doing enough, like, one can argue whether like sending a letter out is enough or not. Let's say if they're not doing enough,
Correct. Yeah.
what is the accountability that an organization like a UGC or a NAC can even be, pulled up for? NAC is the accreditations council. UGC is there. There used to be AICT. There are all these bodies which the government of India has created for basically monitoring, regulating. They routinely cancel, like, licenses of entire engineering colleges and all if things are not up to the par. वो सब है उनका पूरा board of studies आपका. तो
Right.
what happens if UGC, let's say, stops doing one of those things? We are only talking about caste. So what is the accountability of the UGC that can be brought into question? Like, if it
Uh,
doesn't do its job on certain things.
So if the UGC doesn't do its job on certain things, that's why we approach the court and we sort of make UGC a respondent, right? Like that is
Right,
what we've done in this case.
right, right.
Because we realize that this is what the UGC has been doing for ragging regulations. They've been doing that in some instances here and there for ICCs, but they're not doing it for the equity regulations. And every time you ask UGC, what have you done? They just say we've been sending these letters that have no value whatsoever, and no compliance whatsoever. So we've made on the point of NAC, right? I think I want to bring that in because I was very particular about making NAC a party to this petition. And I want to sort of give the rationale for that is because, see, I hope we are busting some myths also in this podcast as to whether these regulations are applicable to only government colleges and universities. No, they're not. They're applicable to everyone. Sorry, if you are an institution in India, you are governed by the UGC as far as these regulations are concerned, and you have to have. You are not an island, nation unto yourself. So you come under these regulations. So that is one thing. The other thing is, um, I thought that NAC is very important because it's the assessment, National Assessment and Accreditation Council. So they give these rankings and these accreditations and they assess universities from time to time, right? So if they're doing that, um, why shouldn't, and especially accreditation and assessment is very important for private universities. At least that was my understanding at that time. And Ravikant, you are
It is.
more of an expert on this, and you can correct me. But at that point, I thought that bringing in NAC is going to be brilliant, and I looked at all the like indicators of NAC for their assessment, right? And they do have a diversity indicator, right? And every time when that indicator comes in, every time universities are only giving them the gender diversity data. They are not giving the any caste diversity data. Like, just as people in India are casteless, we also know that institutions in India are casteless, right? Um, uh, there's no two ways to that. We know that. But that's what they've been doing. So in the name of diversity, all they're trying to do is gender diversity. And even in gender diversity, it's not like all these women that they're showing are who are taking admissions in their universities or their faculty positions. They are women from marginalized castes. So I thought that this is interesting because maybe this is where we can catch some of the private colleges and private universities, and maybe we can seek guidelines to sort of include an explicit indicator where establishing or setting up an ICC, right, would increase your points as far as assessment and
Right.
accreditation is
Right.
concerned, or having an equal opportunity cell will increase your points, or having an SC ST cell will increase your points. So
No, that's a fantastic kind of a catch because rankings mean a lot more, a hell of a lot more. The gradation like A plus or whatever is a lot more on the private universities. But I kind of wanted to like, I'm glad that you brought it up because I wanted to pivot on that a little bit also because um, I think you're already building towards that. The idea that in these places, any which ways, even in gender, these are only Savarna women that they're kind of putting forward. Like, women from like our communities don't end up in large numbers in these places. If they do, they rarely have any authority or position or so on and so forth. So, which is the other question, like, how does an equal opportunity cell even operate inside, let's say, a private university which doesn't have reservations to begin with? Like they're not
correct,
even like it's in a public university, it's a problem because at least they have like agar aap SC ST in admission or hiring mein nahi daloge, then there is a problem. Private
hmm,
universities, they have removed that. I think I was telling you this in one of our conversations that India has about 420 plus private universities now. I don't think even 10 of them give reservations on caste. I don't think, and I'm being generous.
right,
So, so that's almost half of India's universities now are private.
correct,
So, if almost 45-50% of Indian universities don't have reservation, don't have SC ST or OBC faculty, staff, students. There's no quota for it. So they are always going to be under the thing,
correct.
right?
There
So
would be a minuscule minority.
minuscule. It'll be, I think Ashoka University, they did like some study, like one batch in 2018, 2019 in their Young India Fellowship program. They found like it was 80, 85%, 90% Savarna or something like that. Like it beats me. There was zero ST if I remember correctly. So that would be the mix in a lot of places, right? So in a place like that, जहाँ पर SC ST OBC 50% छोड़ो is not even 10% of the student body or the faculty cohort. How does an equal opportunity cell even thrive? Even if it was created and like run like the
Hmm.
anti-ragging cell and all. आपके पास तो है ही नहीं faculty, आपके
Hmm.
पास तो है ही नहीं student. So then how does that operate like in that
So,
sense?
yeah, before I come to the second question of how do they thrive, I think that's a very important question. But I think, is there a need for equal opportunity cells in these spaces? I think more than probably public universities, I would say. So I taught at two private universities, and it's not like there is no SC ST OBC represent. I mean, there's of course no representation, but it's not like there are no SC ST OBC students or faculty in some of these spaces, right?
There'll be few
Yeah,
sprinkled in, yeah.
yeah, but because they are a minuscule minority, even more so, I think we need equal opportunity sets, right? Because I've had students and faculty members coming from these communities, from private colleges, come to me and be like, you know, and it's almost like they are opening up for the first time, and they'd be like, because they find some resonance with you. So I was, because I was also teaching a course called Caste, Courts and Constitution in a private university, right? So that was probably the first time caste was even talked about in that sort of a private college space. So they do come and they're like, we don't have any sort of space. Firstly, it's like we don't have any space. Secondly, it's like, of course, caste discrimination is still against them, is still rampant, and it's even more vile, I would say. And there's a lot of impunity also in that sort of discrimination that is happening. So they're really scared to even come out with their sort of social identities because they fear that, right? So I feel that, is there a need for these in private colleges and universities, knowing that there is no reservation? I do think there is a need. We will come to the question of reservation maybe a little later, because again, that is also a question that I know is close to your heart and my heart as well. But how will they thrive? I don't know. Like, unless there is, like, so this is what I've been saying, like, as lawyers you can do everything in your capacity, you can have the best law, but unless there is organizing and mobilizing within the university space, none of this is going to happen. So you will have, even today, if now, after the Supreme Court decision, after UGC has been directed that mandate everyone, and everyone is supposed to have equal opportunity cells, if there isn't a vibrant Bahujan student community on campus, it's not going to thrive and survive. If the faculty members on campus do not come together, do not mobilize, do not organize, do not create a space, none of this is going to work out, right? And we know that we've had that experience with ICCs, right? We see that how much the institution really is looks at ICCs as a nuisance, right? And unless there is that active faculty organizing and student organizing, these are not
In
going to.
private universities, you can't do that. We by now it's very public now. I got fired from my previous job because I wrote an article. Like, what are
Yeah.
we talking about? Like, forget organizing. I was very careful I've mostly taught in private universities. I've been very careful to never do any kind of organizing within the university system uh, because they immediately let you go
Yes.
and you can't
Yes.
do anything about it. But even my work in writing articles in public domain, which ideally speaking, a private university should be happy that my work is being talked about, but it just made a lot of Savarna academics and administration very uneasy, and they obliged me to move on. And it's part of the reasons why I can't get like the kind of a job that I probably should be working at. And that's the truth with all of us. SC ST OBC academics is none of us who are a little vocal about caste in higher education. Like we can talk about atrocity or something out there, but
Hmm.
inside our private university system, anybody who speaks a little bit,
Correct.
either we have to leave academia or we are working in universities which are like frankly not where we should be working at. Pay
Correct.
is low, thing is low, so आप कर ही नहीं सकते हो. And this is almost 45-50% of Indian university system now. So I don't actually know how the private university system can even be tamed when it comes to caste discrimination.
Yeah, so Ravikant, actually, the way I look at it is, we should, I mean, of course, you know this, and I've talked about it and you've written about it. But private university and its genesis, like at its genesis, at its root, is a problem, right? As far as caste system is concerned, and like when we understand higher education, we are talking about Brahminical systems, right?
Yeah.
And private universities, the way they are, I don't think any conversation that I am trying to have or you are trying to have about reforming private universities, right? I think it's just bullshit, and I think there is no real solution to that.
No, I
Um,
agree. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think it's not like private universities are a part of the problem. Private universities are a problem. Like they are the problem, actually, right? And any sort of this kind of conversations that we need space and we need this and we need that, like that's at the genesis of private universities, and it is a structural issue. It is a systemic issue. And if you ask me, I think we need to do away with. Like despite all problems with public universities, I still think that there is so much mechanism and there is so much legal framework to sort of recalibrate and to reform and to do a lot within the constitutional framework, right, with public universities. But with private universities, I think, yeah, I think it's the problem.
No, I agree with you. I think one would argue because there is so much constitutional framework and possibility within the public university system, they created the private university system. I've made this argument before that private universities become a thing after the OBC reservations get passed through in
Correct.
2006, like because that changes the class dynamic, in many which ways. Which actually makes me also want to pivot to a different part, which is slightly tricky always to talk about within the context of the Ambedkarite movement, because even you mentioned the Rohith Vemula Act, which was,
Hmm.
I think at one point even Congress was endorsing we'll bring it, and Rahul Gandhi.
Congress did have a meeting about, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there was, but the phrasing of this and a lot of this only talks about SC ST. SC ST has become like a thing.
huh.
And you've always been, you come from a denotified tribal Vimukta kind of a background. You've always been very vocal in centering the DNT, denotified, ex-criminalized tribe narrative or focus within this caste mosaic, and in the constitutional categorization of, in a large number of cases, a lot of the Vimukta DNT communities just get lumped into OBC. And when people think OBC, they just
Yes,
think of,
yes. Yeah,
huh.
like
So
they're spread across the three.
yeah, 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 yeah. So OBC, like, that if I remember, that was also like some of the focus of the article that we had written for the Caravan back in the day, where
Correct.
OBC just like people seem to think this is just Yadavs and all of these landed peasantry caste,
Ten
but
counts.
actually it's a very very big collection of some of the very marginalized people. So
Dalit Muslims included.
Dalit Muslims included. So, like, what happens if you walk into like a central university or a framework like that, where private to chodi do private we are not even, we just discussed like it like almost doesn't apply in any case, but it should apply, but it practically doesn't apply. But in a private public university system also, if I walk in with like an OBC kind of a background as a faculty or a student,
Correct.
most of the regulations are anyways only speaking to SC and ST. So
Name and ethnicity. Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
and like we are seeing the student suicide data. There are OBC kids who are also kind of committing suicide. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. So what happens in this framework of constitutionalization, where this idea of OBC marginalization also kind of like gets lost behind? Is there also a focus, or should there be a focus on this also?
Okay. So to start with, I think we need to go back to the anti-reservation movement after the OBC reservations were implemented, right? They what they called, the upper caste called the Youth for Equality movement, and there were guitars and they were singing songs and all of that. And I remember. So before we even move on to whether there need to be regulations for OBCs, let's start with where the OBCs themselves have started.
Right.
And I was very young. I think I was like 14 or something around that time. And I was constantly seeing these like in all kind, like on TV, in all kinds of your news channels, these images of these youngsters or as if they are on some like revolutionary sort of path, they were talking about these things. And in these these news clippings, you would see one OBC person, who would be on that side and who would come on the TV and be like, मैं OBC हूँ, पर मेरे साथ मुझे लगता है कि इन लोगों के साथ बहुत गलत हो रहा है और मुझे कोई ओबीसी रिजर्वेशन की जरूरत नहीं है, you know and I would be so vile and so angry, like even as a child, that what is happening. And I remember, like, we were holding like these, like my family started Arakshan Hakka Sanrakshan Samiti at that point, which translates to Arakshan, like reservation, right to reservation and protection of that right, sort of a committee. And we would go to every like sort of Ferguson and SP College and all these like big colleges in Pune, and we would hold like meetings with students, and there would be like one or two of these like OBC kids, and most of the all the kids who were actually coming against this youth for equality movement were only SC ST kids. ST तो वैसे भी you see कि hardly उनका कोई population, मतलब उनका कोई participation, because they are also not represented in these spaces, but it would mostly be taken up by SC kids. And then on the other side, you would have OBC kids, and you would be like, this is for you, like, what are you talking about? And they would be like, नहीं नहीं, but मैं तो मेरिट में believe करता हूँ. तो वहां से शुरुआत है एक तो पहले. तो ओबीसी का प्रॉब्लम है कि एक तो डिनायल भी है कि उनके साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होता है. आई थिंक दैट्स अ बिगर पार्ट ऑफ like the problem.
Till you face it.
And also, Ravikant, I feel like it's not only about you facing it. I feel like that sort of articulation also comes with a certain caste consciousness, right? Like, I feel like the SC kids are very responsive when it comes to understanding and articulating what is happening to them in these university spaces. That's also because there has been so much anti-caste consciousness within SC communities, right? But you don't see that, say, amongst, I also kind of see that amongst tribal communities. I think there is a strong sense of assertion, at least as far as their identities are concerned. But with OBC kids, like you really don't see that there is any kind of articulation of what is happening to them, unless you go to them and be like, oh, they'll tell you 100 things, and they'll be like, मेरे साथ ये हो रहा है institution में, वो हो रहा है, this, that. And unless you like, give them a nudge and be like, but do you think this is because you are, your name says it all, or you're a Yadav, and that thing gives it all, that gives it away. And then they, like sort of start thinking, and that sort of prodding is necessary. But that's still the case, despite so many years. I think the Rohith Vemula movement really changed it also. To a great extent. It's not like the SC community needed some sort of awakening, it was the OBC community that needed awakening, and that also happened during the 2016 movement is what I feel. Yeah, so when it comes to, is discrimination happening against OBCs? It is. At JNU, and this is a report that we've mentioned in our petition, there was a study that was conducted under Professor Sukhdev Thorat, okay, and that was about discrimination that happens in the Viva exams, right? And what was before the committee was that we need to know if we need to reduce the overall percentage of Viva marks in examination. Because a lot of SC ST students were coming, SC ST OBC students were coming in, and they were saying that हमको तो 2 mark मिल रहे, 3 mark मिल रहे, and जबकि हमारे written exams में हमको बहुत अच्छे marks मिल रहे. So they did a full study, and when they did that study, they found that the differential between written and oral exams for SC ST OBC students was much higher when you compare that differential to general category students, right? And in fact, with OBCs, it was even more skewed and it was even higher, right? So this is the kind of data. So it's not, if OBCs are saying कि हमारे साथ discrimination नहीं हो रहा है, so that's, I mean, they really need to do something about it, because discrimination तो हो रहा है. The data is showing you कि discrimination हो रहा है. अब आपको accept करना है या नहीं, आपके ऊपर है. दूसरा, I think कि both the SC ST cell 1998 regulations, because that came in 1998, and that's not when we had OBC reservations in higher educational institutions. So they, yeah, and this licensing officer who is there is supposed to implement all government policies related to SCSTs, right? But what happens to OBCs? Because there are government policies when it comes to reservation, when it comes to roster, you also have to implement that with respect to OBCs.
Right.
ST cell regulations were not updated or amended or changed after the OBC reservation. Same applies with the 2012 regulations. Unfortunately, the 2012 regulations again also only talk about scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. They don't mention OBCs. And worst of, I feel like you said, there is such marginalized communities and communities that are facing double, triple marginalization, criminalization, state suppression, who have no protection because they're clubbed under the OBC reservation. So we will have to understand that it was in the year 1992 that the first case of caste discrimination in higher education, the first documented case of caste discrimination in higher education, was against Chuni Kotal from Jadavpur University, who died, and she was a denotified tribal woman. She belonged to the Lodha Sabar community, right? And that is, if that is the first documented case, right, and then we move on to other cases, we need to understand that she would have been OBC, or some sort of sub caste
Mm-hmm.
of theirs could have been OBC, and she would have had no protection. And then there are so many Chuni Kotals, and there are so many others who have no protection of any of these regulations, right? So I think there is also a need to revise and revive some of these regulations in light of the new OBC reservation in higher education institutions.
Right. No, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that there is a sense of denial within the OBC community. I think a lot of OBC intellectuals don't like me because, like, I keep pointing this up. India, mein, I think OBC movement fundamentally has been led by scheduled caste. We are in great debt of SC grassroots movement, grassroots leaders. They actually fought for a lot of these issues, and
Even
our
OBC,
OBC intellectuals end up becoming mouthpieces of BJP and like flipping, like, there's so many cases of this. So I guess there is a circumspection, but I think this is a very important point also, that you can't keep like expecting your own community to not fight for it. I think there are so many OBC identity. We can do a whole conversation on this and the problems of OBC mobilization, but I think somewhere within the mix, they're not even policy visible in many cases, like, and don't even get me started on this creamy layer makhan nonsense that they have created for OBCs. It is such a pain in the ass. I think they've deliberately designed policies to be dysfunctional for a vast majority of people, and what that means for semi-nomadic tribes, nomadic tribes, denotified tribes, all kinds of groups which are also lumped into the OBC categorization. I think it has much deeper and severe kind of consequences. But like, I don't want to like take, like, we've already clocked an hour. I don't want to go too far deep into it.
yeah,
Um, I wanted to also talk about like the idea of reservations in private universities, because for me, and like maybe we don't need to talk at
yeah,
depth because I've already taken too much of your time, but like a little bit, I just wanted your comment. Um, like, one argument, philosophical argument that I can make is, um, to have a caste discrimination redressal framework, first I need to get enough of the people into the system, right? I know you made the opposite point also, like even if there are very few, it just means they're more vulnerable. I completely agree. That has been my experience in working in private universities for a decade. Nobody wants to talk about it because the moment you talk about it, you're unhireable and so on. But somebody has to, like, you know bell the cat, so to say, right? So um, does that conversation, like, I don't think, apart from Rahul Sonpimple and his AISSCA जो भी उनकी नई organization, I don't think anybody is even talking about reservation in the private sector, especially in private universities. Um, at its, as an idea itself, and what kind of worms it opens up. But do you think there is a legal pathway to it, or what would be the challenges to something like that even? I know
I
the
mean,
discourse challenges. All these Delhi media will immediately be like, "Oh, merit all Tavleen auntie and Tavleen Singh and all of them will be like, oh, hi Allah Tauba." वो तो
yeah,
होगा ही, वो उसकी नहीं बात कर रहा मैं. Legally speaking, intervention wise, what are the challenges for that?
I think the challenges are not that much, legally speaking and constitutionally
Hmm.
speaking, honestly. So let's understand that private colleges and private universities, there was a case called the PA Namdar case, which is a constitutional bench case of the Supreme Court, right? And this issue of whether there can be reservation in private colleges and private universities, and especially with minority institutions, that had come up.
Right.
And at this point, the legal position of the law of the land is this, that you cannot have reservations in minority institutions. That's it, right? So there is an explicit bar on reservations, but that applies only to minority institutions because they are protected under the Constitution, right? So that's the law. Now, does this prevent you, as in I mean the state, from implementing reservations in private universities? It doesn't. In fact, there is a way out, and that way out is in the Constitution. So if you read Section 15, if I may, just give me a moment. Let me open my copy of the Constitution. I think 15.4 or 15.5 of the Constitution.
For people listening on the audio, she's flipping through the actual constitution. That's what's going on. Hence the silence.
Yeah. So Section 15.4 of, by the way, Section 15 is for discrimination, like prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, etc. But then there are reservation provisions, so there are positive provisions also. In
Also,
Section
Article 15 was a film by Ayushmann Khurrana, so
correct. So people know.
we have to acknowledge all legends. Huh? So go on. Sorry.
Correct. Correct. तो आर्टिकल 15 में एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट है जिसकी वजह से वी हैव रिजर्वेशंस इन हायर एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशंस आर्टिकल 15.4 so nothing in this article or in clause 2 of section 29 don't need that shall prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, right? And then you have section 15.5, which says nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provisions, special provision by law. Okay, this word is important. Section 15.5, by law, for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward class of citizens or for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, insofar as such special provisions relate to their admission to educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by the state, other than minority educational institutions. So, minority, like I said, the explicit bar is only and only on minority educational institutions. Private educational institutions, aided, unaided, any kind of institution is not barred from implementing reservation. But the condition is, because I stressed the word law, the state to have reservations or to implement reservations in these institutions will have to come up with a law. And by state, I mean it can be state government or central government, right? Or the parliament, basically. If it's a law, it will be the parliament, right? So it needs to be a central law. So that's it. All it takes is for the parliament to have the will to have that law to implement reservation in all private institutions, educational institutions, and that can be done. But we know for many structural, social
Right. Right.
of reasons why that is not happening because there is a vested interest in having no reservations for all these Tavleen Singhs and all others in private
Right.
educational institutions. That's also the reason why you have lateral entry, right? The way
Yeah.
out. But that's also the reason why you have EWS reservation, a way out. So private educational institutions are that for the Savarnas.
No, no, it's scary for the Savarnas because if tomorrow we get reservation in private university like Ashoka, we will want reservation in Jaipur Literature Festival also. Then what will happen? You know, like how will Shashi Tharoor get to come up on stage and talk again about his latest? How does that guy write like a book every 2 years? Like we need like Savarna protection. We need Jaipur Literature Festival in Sonipat
There's a
for
Savarna
that.
printing press somewhere.
Huh?
Book after book. There's a Savarna printing press, so book
I
after
know,
book.
I know, I know, I know. You and I will not be part of that contract. हमें एक आध मिल जाएगा कुछ साल में, like once in 5 years we'll write one book,
The Mirch
and then
Masala.
हाँ, and then we'll compete with each other. कि अरे दिशा की बुक को वहाँ फीचर किया, मेरी बुक को वहाँ फीचर, like that, this is all we are doing. But yeah, thank you, Disha. Like this has been a very long conversation. I won't keep you for long. I think there's a lot to unpack in this, and at some point when I would really love to talk again on the intervention you filed with, I don't want to get this wrong, with VCK
Yes.
on the Buddhist sites. Like, if you can briefly talk, like, about that, like, because
Yeah.
that's a whole, expanse by itself.
Yeah. So this is about the Places of Worship Act case where, all the Hindutva people are going to all the Muslim sites, mosques, etc., dargahs, and they are saying that हमारे भगवान और हमारे हिंदुओं के temples यहाँ पे पहले थे. So basically, what the intervention is doing is we are saying that on all your Hindu temples and Hindu sites, हमारे Buddhist sites पहले उसके ऊपर Hindu sites बने हैं. So I think that's basically the intervention. So if they are challenging
Right.
Muslim sites, we are saying that, but of course we're also saying that if you dig deeper, you will find Buddhist stupas and Buddhist sites and Buddhist monasteries. So therefore, we are coming in support of the Places of Worship Act, and we are saying that look, you need to give it a stop. And we did sign a contract, everyone, on the 15th of August, 1947, and also when the Constitution came, and that was an internal contract, and we put an end to all the conflict, right? So please keep it at that. Otherwise, if you dig deeper, you know what you will find. Yeah, that's
ज़्यादा मत खोदो, नीचे बुद्धा मिलेंगे, which is
it.
no, but that is a very interesting intervention, and personally very important to me as somebody who studies a lot of history. There's written records of tens of thousands of these Buddhist stupas and shrines, and many of them have been co-opted into temples, which are, some of them are very important temples. Like, we'll get into trouble if we start talking about them, but historically, history is funny like that,
All
So
the important temples, in fact. All
yeah,
the
yeah. So that is a very explosive piece of work that you've also kind of initiated. I'm always in awe of all you can do. In you're always trying to do so many different things, work with so many different people. You also do a lot of pro bono work. Before we go, like, I just like have one criticism, which is like, I don't understand why you keep defending Pune food.
Pune.
Okay. Like, for somebody who's so talented, who understands so many different dimensions, who's so critical, like, how can you absolve Pune of its food mediocrity? Like,
Food mediocrity. Okay.
yeah,
Not
you told me once that like Pune has like good misal pav, and I have never been able to take you seriously.
because you only
You,
go to these like Brahmin places, no, like where they serve you misal in the western part of the city. That's where you lived. You
that's
never.
Pune. That's
No,
Pune.
that's not
That is
Pune.
Pune. Like, for audiences who don't understand this
I think
context,
it's Bhima Koregaon. I
Disha,
want
Bhima
okay.
Koregaon is not Pune.
Bhima
Bhima
Koregaon.
Koregaon is Bhima Koregaon.
No,
Bhima
Bhima
Koregaon.
Koregaon is in Pune. It's in Pune
So
district.
this is our great dispute. Just to give an audience idea, um, whatever are not Brahminical parts of Pune, which Brahmins don't call Pune, Disha calls it Pune, and therefore she defends Pune. And my point always is, it's not Pune, it's Bhima Koregaon, it's all of these other parts. Like,
Pune.
Pune is Pune is like, Shaniwar Pet and like Deccan and Baner and Aund and Hinchewadi. Now IT workers, like that's Pune. So, and like it has very mediocre food.
Savarnas want you to think that that is Pune,
Right.
but from the Bahujan lens, that has never been Pune. I
But
don't know.
Savarna lens is like, is the law, is what we are discovering. So it's a Savarna, like, I will not get you in trouble. I will start talking about the court, and we'll keep that away from camera. I have nice things to say about our judicial system and chief justices, which I will keep off the record.
Yeah.
But thank you for your time and opinion, Disha. This was a very fun episode, and I will overlook your love for Pune and Pune's cuisine and your
Yes,
passionate defense of its
please.
mediocrity. It's truly one of the only critiques I have of you and your work and your thoughts. Otherwise, I think we agree on most things. Um, Thank you for your time. Would love to have you back sometime to talk more on some of these other interventions and other cases. Thank you everyone for listening. Jai Bhim. Take care. Bye bye.
Jareem. Bye, everyone.
Hey, you finished the whole episode. Well done. I can't believe you can tolerate my voice for so long. But in case you liked what you heard, you might consider also joining for the exclusive episode that I do for my paying subscribers, because that show gets into slightly edgier topics and I don't really want to put it out in the public domain. It's available on the Patreon as well as on YouTube through the join option. And in case you don't want to drop extra money, I completely understand. Please keep listening to my regular show. I'm grateful as ever. There's a buy me a coffee link in case you want to drop some love. Otherwise, just have a nice day. Stay being awesome. Bye bye.